You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. We have a great Halloween special. We're going to be speaking with Von Braschler about encounters with malevolent entities and other disembodied spirits. So get your blankie and your garlic and be prepared to be scared. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healing, and psychic readings. So if there's stuff going on in your life, you need some clarity, some direction, you have health issues, problems at work, or problems in your relationships, give me a call, send me an email, and we can set up a time for a private consultation. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you can jumpstart your intuition today and downloading our free 50-page guide. Couple of quick announcements. This Saturday is the History, Haunts, and Legends Conference in spooky Jefferson, Texas. I'll be there doing a presentation on intuition as well as doing private sessions for people that attend. So if you live in the Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, or Arkansas areas, please come by. Tickets are still available. JeffersonGhostWalk.com. Also, if you haven't gotten a copy of my new book, E.T. Chronicles, it's available through Amazon.com. And while you're there, you can check out my new film, my documentary icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancients. It's available for digital download for only $1.99. I mean, what a bargain is that? And you get to hang out with me. Even better. Let's see, anything else going on? One other thing, if you are in the East Texas area, I will be doing a gallery session. I have not done a gallery session in years. That's going to be held at Metalunas in Gladewater, Texas, which is by Tyler, in between Tyler, Texas and Longview. And most people are probably going, where and where? Yeah, it's East Texas, almost to Louisiana. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about our guest tonight, and then we can all prepare to be scared because it's our Halloween special. Von Braschler is a former newspaper and magazine editor. He writes and leads workshops in the areas of consciousness development, time, chakra healing, pet healing, and dream work. He is actively involved in organizing events for Ancient Mysteries, Ancient Wisdoms, the Minneapolis branch of the International Theosophical Society. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio, Von Braschler. Hey, Von, how are you?
Hi, Dr. Rita. Fine, thank you.
The last time you were on, we were talking about time travel. And now you're here and we're going to be talking about ghosts. And even though they're both kind of metaphysical and paranormal, they almost seem kind of a world apart. So what got you interested in talking and writing about ghosts and malevolent spirits?
Well, it's curious. I mean, I'd always seen ghosts, even as a young child, and I saw them everywhere, and I heard them when I didn't see them, or I sensed them if I didn't hear them and see them. It seemed kind of easy. They'd pop in and pop out, and I would notice them. And I never knew what to say to them, so usually I just ignore them, pretend they weren't there, or if they were in my way and they frightened me, I'd just shout at them and they'd leave. But then I met an actual professional ghost hunter, a really credible one, and she gave me some training and said, "Well, you could do this if you wanted." And I didn't feel it was my calling, let's say, but later on I did have some very spooky encounters trying to help a series of friends and neighbors, and they all kind of happened in a kind of a spooky woods in Oregon. And I suppressed that for many, many years. I just put it out of my head. And being somewhat psychic, I found other things to write about. I eventually left community journalism and magazine work and started writing about time and our relationship with pets and energy healing and dreams. And there was just this thing that kept me kind of up at night sometimes, and sometimes I'd wake up from a nightmare and I'd be reliving these events. And I just decided finally I had to get it outside of me. I had to purge myself, tell this crazy story. And I thought the time is right because right now we seem to be going through a cycle of fascination with ghosts and ghost hunting. And a lot of it's on television. We see reality shows, we see movies and books, and they're very sensational, and they play up the fun aspect of the adventure of going into a haunted house and chasing ghosts all over the place and trying to record them on recording equipment. And it just seemed to me, from my experience, my point of view is that some of this is dangerous and it should be entered into very cautiously, because we don't always know what is haunting a building.
Hear, hear. Even with those TV shows, I mean, I don't know how many investigations you've gone on and stuff like that, but my experience was every so often you would go into a place that had activity, but for the most part, there really wasn't anything going on. How's that?
Yes. Yes.
Unlike the TV shows where there's something going on everywhere all the time.
Well, don't you think they kind of invent some of it too? They make you think there's something. They act like they're so scared, and they say, "Oh, what did you hear? Did you hear something?" And they said, "Oh, we just missed it. We didn't quite catch it, you know." And then they'll run around and pretend like there's a great thing, and they actually, kind of stir up trouble. They go in and they rile up these spirits that really don't want to be discovered or confronted, and then they get a little bit angry, and then it gets a little bit testy, and I think there's just a lot of misconception about the spirit world and what haunts our homes and buildings.
Exactly. When you were young and seeing ghosts, did you ever talk about it, or did you just think everybody could do that?
Well, I realized that not everyone could do it, but like my son, who's extremely psychically gifted, I just tuned it out. I mean, I would store it away in the back of my mind. It was there, but I mean, I have the same feeling, frankly, about UFOs. I've seen a couple, and my policy is I don't bother them, they don't bother me. I'll just walk around it. But sometimes, I would see a ghost like the one that haunted our apartment building in Seattle, Washington. And my wife could hear it too, because it was a lady who had prepared our apartment for us, and she'd painted it and changed the light bulbs and got us going. And the very next day, as we're moving in, they're carrying her body out from the floor below. She
Oops.
committed suicide, and tragically, she seemed to haunt the building. They moved her children out. She just separated from her husband. And we could hear her walking around. And I wasn't the only one. My wife could hear it. Visitors could hear it. And, a lot of people would try to find some logical explanation, like it's an old house, it's settling. But you'd hear the footprints below. And even though the woman was in spirit form, not in body, and didn't really have feet to make footsteps, you could hear footsteps. And later on, I would go in the basement, and a light would follow me around the basement, where she was probably quite upset because her husband had spent so many days working down there on his radios that he restored. I tried building a dark room in the basement, and it had no windows in the far corner. And in the far corner also there was an enclosure, and that enclosure had no windows to the greater outer, facilities. And just to make sure, I used black plastic, and I wrapped it all around the walls and doors. And it was really, really dark. And I would set up my dark room, and I'd get going in there with my safe light, and then a light would shine on my work table. And I thought it was just very strange. It would always come out there just when I was working. And then I ran into her husband, and he said, "Oh, my wife really resented the time I spent down here in the basement. She really wanted to be down here with me, I think." And I think she was. She spent a lot of time down there. So I think a lot of people will see ghosts. Not a lot of people, but many people will see ghosts, and they will just put it out of their mind. And for most of my life, I've done that. It sometimes works to walk around them.
But I bet it felt kind of freeing if you brought it all to the surface to write this book, to just own that part of yourself, and own those experiences that you had.
Yeah, I don't really actually don't feel good about writing the book because I thought it would really purge my soul and get it out of my head, and the nightmare would be ended of what was in the trailer and the floating heads and the decapitations, all the crazy things that later on happened to me. But actually, now I'm kind of worried about the people, even though I've changed their names and a little bit of details about the people. They're real people this happened to. And like I say in the beginning, I hope the survivors have a better, brighter future, because some of the people up on Mount Hood had very, very bad outcomes.
Well, and I'm sure you're going to share some of the grim details with us later.
I'll come clean if you like.
Okay, that sounds good. But you talk. Let's start here. Mm-hmm. So, would you say that all ghosts are created equal, or are some maybe more deceptive and crafty with who and what they are?
Yeah, I mean, you do ghost houses, so I think you kind of understand this, but a lot of people listening perhaps don't. You go into a building, and very often you'll find, as my teacher Helen did, she had a very noble outlook. She would go to a house and find the people that were left behind, and she would make contact with them, and she would psychically reach out to them and encourage them to leave, to go, to evolve, to go on. And so I think a lot of times you think, well, what you're going to find in a building is just that. It's going to be someone who lived there and died there, and they're just confused. Maybe they died suddenly. It was an accident, or they didn't expect to die. They suddenly died, and they weren't prepared on all levels, emotionally. I mean, I think that's what's left behind. I think the lower emotional body and the lower personality are there, because really, most ghosts just don't have a lot going for them. I mean, you're really not dealing with the higher level of the being. I think that the higher spiritual aspect of us, our life force or soul or whatever you want to call it, does leave. But in many cases, a fragment is left behind, a fragment of a person who is reluctant to go, confused that he or she has died, is stubbornly hanging on, insisting, denying that this was the end. It really isn't the end. It's just a transition. And there's just a fragment of them, a very dull part of their memories, their personality, their emotional self has remained behind. And they'll be sitting perhaps on a sofa, and they'll be with their hat and their coat. Maybe they have a cane in their hand or a purse, and they're ready to go, like they're waiting for the bus. But they don't know exactly how to get on the bus, and they're not too sure it's safe to get on the bus. And that's how you find them. You know, that's how I see them. I mean, that's how my teacher saw them. But that isn't everyone. I mean, there are ghosts of people who have lived and died and left a fragment behind, and they're just stubbornly hanging on, and they're hiding in buildings. And if confronted, they will run. If you try to communicate with them, they will ignore you. If you try to persist, they will get angry, you know. And I've chased ghosts through buildings, and they just don't want to be. They don't want to be contacted. They don't want any help moving on. And I think it's sad because, you know, part of them is stuck in time and place, ritualistically living out something that they can't quite get out of themselves. And then there are ghosts of people who have lived, and animals, pets that have lived and died, and they are angry. It's just angry, and they don't want to be confronted. They do not want to be pursued. They do not want anyone to communicate with them. They don't want any help moving on. They're quite settled in, and they, in time, will maybe glom on to others who have died, and they'll form like little families of different generations of people who never knew each other in their lifetime, but are now spirits together sharing a space. And sometimes they're very deceptive and very manipulative, and they will call out to you your name. First of all, they don't have a mouth, so they're projecting a thought form. And since they're projecting a thought form, they can project just about any thought form you might want to hear. And so they're projecting very specifically to a person, not communicating with maybe everyone who enters the room, but selectively, choosing what you think you hear, allowing you to record what images on recording equipment that might amuse you and certainly would amuse them. They can shape shift. They can assume the identity of your dear Aunt Ruth and deceive you. So there is a lot of manipulation from some of these spirits. And some may be deceased people, and some may be people, being spirits who have never actually lived a human existence. They're not of this world.
Those are the ones I like the least.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Because you never really know, as my psychic teacher told me, you never really know who or what you're dealing with. What they are, what kind of a spirit they are, what kind of energy they are, and what they can do, you know. And those, as opposed to deceased people who are typically ghosts, can be very deceptive and very difficult to deal with, and they can be very manipulative. They can be dangerous.
Mm-hmm. I mean, my experience has been, well, the way I like to put it is they don't speak human.
No.
And so their values are not the same as ours. And so where we might exhibit compassion or, you know, some emotional state, they're not the same. They don't have the same values or morals as us. And so, what we might see as being manipulative might be perfectly okay in their world. We don't know.
Yes, and the way they choose to communicate sometimes is very bizarre. Trying to speak to you in numbers or something. I don't know. I know I'm not the only one who has encountered spirits that are like rattling off numbers, and I have no idea what that is, other than I do get that numbers are the universal language of the universe. So maybe they think that's the way to communicate. But no, they have no reference to us. We have no reference to them. It's extremely difficult to try to get them out of a building. You can try, then you're talking more like exorcism than deghosting techniques. The tricks that I was taught by Helen, the woman who deghosted houses in the San Juan Islands, involved psychic communication, encouragement for them to move on, a lot of hand-holding, tenderness. And if it came to that, a bag of tricks, things you would bring in a little bag,
and we'll come back to that, because there's been a couple of questions already.
It finally dawned on me that, yes, she knew that I was going to find something out there that was just extremely difficult. And even then, what could you possibly bring with you that would deal with some of these alien creatures that would be haunting a building? I mean,
have you ever encountered any interdimensional entities?
That's what I think they often are. They're interdimensional. And to say where they're from, I don't know. I think you're dealing with a lot of like a lot of spirits of well, obviously another dimension, but you're dealing with the spirit realm, probably like nature spirits and elemental spirits and gnomes. I think I've encountered a gnome here or there, which are really troublesome, and you're just going to find yourself outmatched with them. You really have you have to use caution, and either learn to walk around them or leave.
Yeah, it definitely requires a different kind of mentality, one that is not in my bag of tricks, and I usually pass those ones along to somebody else.
Yep.
But I like your method, because it sounds very much like mine. I dialogue with them. I do some energy work on them. I try to heal them, and so that they can take their next step. And it sounds that's what you do too. Woo-hoo.
Yeah, I mean, originally I just wanted to call this Ghost the Cautionary Tale, but really it's more than just a cautionary tale, because there are legitimate ghost hunters who go in and attempt to deghost a house, and that, if done with the best of intentions, is a very noble thing to do. I mean, to help these poor people move on, and to help the people whose homes are haunted.
What about friends or family members? I was giving a presentation, and a woman came because she had been told by a psychic that her brother was around her. She was a twin, and her brother had crossed, and he was around her, and she needed to get rid of him. And she was really upset because she didn't want him to go.
Yeah.
And so what is your feeling about, having friends or relatives come around? And, then there are people that talk about, well, there's a window between when they pass and when they actually make that transition. I was wondering if you can kind of touch on that also.
Well, yeah, I try to, toward the end of the book, bring up a safe way to approach ghosts for people who aren't, professional ghost hunters like you. And I think it's always legitimate. It's probably not very legitimate to try to summon ghosts just to chit chat and get them to tell you where the secret heirlooms are all hidden in the house, or to ask for closure if you think Grandma was mad at you. Let them go. I mean, gosh, why do we not let these people rest? But in the case of the spirit who hasn't fully left this earth plane and has some fragment left behind, it's very typical for many of us to encounter loved ones, perhaps family members, or even pets that come to you soon after they have physically died, and they'll say goodbye, or they'll walk through, like my uncle walked through his boyhood home, and the cat that jumps up on your bed, or the dog that seems to still come around with you, but at some point, you have to be willing to let them go, because it's in their best interest to move on. I mean, I think most religious traditions think that the eternal spirit in us moves on somewhere. It is, after all, energy. It can't be destroyed, but to be earthbound and always making the loop of saying goodbye to everyone you've seen, can only last a few days, and then generally people will leave. But it is very, very typical for people to encounter a loved one who recently passed, and they will visit you, or they'll flash in front of your eyes, or you will dream of them, a very vivid, lucid dream, or you'll hear them in your head. You might even think you've seen them. Or in the case of my father, he actually came in the room and told me a joke, which just was priceless. So I think, I had a roommate, Deb, who died like this, and she came, it was tragic. She died right after her 33rd birthday of cancer. It was really unfortunate. But, we walked her through the whole transition. I talked to her about walking through doors and going into a room. And then finally she got to where she could open the door to another room, and there would be light. And then she would feel comfortable in that room. And then she was ready to go. And then she died. But right after she died, she came to the house where we lived, and she played with her cat. and I saw that, and I saw the ribbon. She played. She came down, tiptoed down the stairs with a big pink ribbon and played with her cat Wizard, and she dropped it into a wicker basket. And after the image just kind of disappeared in my head, I ran downstairs, and lo and behold, there was this big pink ribbon that hadn't been there yesterday. And I find out that she'd been actually making presents for people and hiding all these pink ribbons in a closet. Well, later that night, in her bedroom, the stereo came on. It just came on by itself. And then after, a couple hours, it turned off. And then the next night, it came on and turned off. And then her family came and removed all her things from the house. And still the next night, the stereo came on. But that was it, so maybe 3 days. I don't know how long it lasts, but you hope that they say their goodbyes in a day or two, and they move on. And that's true of many, many people. They'll make a farewell trip. They'll visit people, which you may or may not be conscious of, but they will. And your pets as well. They'll come and say goodbye, and then they go. It's natural to go. It's unnatural when a part of them remains here. Then we have a haunting.
Can people go into the light and, make that transition, and then 2 years later or 3 years later, there's something going on? Can they just come visit?
Yeah.
Not stay, but just...
I have a lot of trouble with that, because here's the problem I have with that. I'll say maybe, but I'll say it's unreliable, and probably a person should avoid these situations, because, they might appear to come to you, and you think it's your grandmother, and you think she's saying something to you that's significant, and you're all excited, but so much time has passed. Old Granny's gone. She's somewhere else. She's no longer here, and you have to wonder, since you really can't authenticate, that it really is Granny, who you're really speaking with. There have been many cases where people have been tricked by a voice or a fragrance or or some mannerism of a spirit that would seem to be a loved one visiting, and it probably wasn't. How would you know? You know, it's terribly unreliable. And it's just terribly unrealistic to think that after somebody dies and goes somewhere else, they're going to keep coming back for a summer vacation with you. It's just not going to happen. I mean, their time here's ended. Mm-hmm. That's my feeling anyway.
Okay. You know, you were talking about the stereo turning itself on. What about other electronic gadgets? I know that on this show, and see, I don't even want to say it out loud. I'll do a ghost show, and you know, my computer blows up. I mean, not forever, but it just kind of ends up having a mind of its own. You know, or my phone glitches up. I mean, have you had those kind of weird experiences too?
Well, I remember at the newspaper we had some of the early computerized typesetting where you type in to the machine, but then it would come out as like words on paper. And I would type something in. I remember one year at Christmas, I typed something in a headline, something like 3 die in highway fatality. And then I pushed the button that said print, and then the tape comes out the end. This is an old CompuGraphic headliner. And it said, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And I don't know where that came from, because you can't store information in a CompuGraphic headliner. I mean, it's a bit of old, you know, equipment that's not around anymore, but you didn't store information in it. You just typed something and it came out, and that was that. So I know that a lot of people will have experiences with electronics, telephone, calls from the dead. I've received calls from the dead.
No way. No way.
Yeah, I mean,
was it one of those
my
recordings?
Next book starts out where I get calls from a man in India, and he keeps encouraging me to go and visit him in India. And it turns out he's a deceased yoga expert who teaches people how to meditate in the morning beside water in the early morning light. And in the book, Confessions of a Reluctant Ghost Hunter, I tell of a story of a woman who was looking for her sister on Mount Hood, and she would get calls from her sister, and she thought, well, you know, why doesn't her sister ever tell her where she is? She just screams and screams, and then the line goes dead. Well, she was getting calls from her after she actually was dead, because they found her body in a lake. So, I mean, people do get calls from the dead. My sister received calls from my brother when he died, and we were all living, all three of us, in different states, and so we weren't able to get there and do much for him. You know, he died at home, and then they found the body, and while the body was at the mortuary, my sister's getting these nasty calls that sound like him screaming at her, calling her names that she hadn't heard since they were little kids. They never really got along anyway. And he's screaming at her and yelling at her and calling her names and saying everything's her fault. And it's kind of irrational. And so she gets a series of these calls from him, or from someone, let's say. And she thinks, gee, you know, because he never says who he is, but it sounds like our brother. So she hands the phone to her oldest daughter and said, who is this on the phone screaming at me? She listens for a while and hands it back, and she said, it sounds like my uncle. And she says, he's dead, you know. She said, yeah, but it sounds like him. So the next time the phone rings, it's the same thing, and her husband's there. Now her husband is a city administrator of a small town in northwest Washington state. She hands him the phone. Now he's quite conservative. He's not into all this woo-woo stuff. Hands him the phone, and she says, who is this screaming at me? I keep getting these terrible calls. And he listens for a while, hands back the phone, and says, sounds like your brother. She says, that's not possible. And he says, well, but it does sound like him. Well, that continued up until we sent his body to the crematorium in the next state. This is a small Midwest operation, so they didn't have a crematorium. So the body goes to Montana. And when it arrives at the crematorium, she gets one last call where he's screaming and says, "I'm burning, I'm burning, I'm burning." And then they called me and said, "Okay, the cremation is complete. Where do we send the ashes?" And then no more calls.
All right, that is creepy.
Yes. That is creepy. I'm so glad he never called me.
Yeah, I would not be real happy about that whole situation. So we have some questions. As soon as you came on air, they started hitting me with questions in the chat room, and I was like, kind of hold off a little bit. And so I gave them the okay to list questions, and so there's a ton.
Uh-oh.
All right. So this is from Bota, a new guest to the chat room. I do not recognize that name. And his or her question is, how do you know who the ghost is? Aren't there tricksters out there?
That is a wonderful question. And that's why I'm reluctant to try to actually summon ghosts or call upon the dead to talk to them, because it is really, really hard to authenticate who it is. What you're seeing is just kind of a floaty image. and you're looking at something that would be like, I don't know, like electromagnetic plasma energy. And they're projecting thought forms, whatever they want you to. I mean, you have to recognize that they really have no voice, and no physical voice. They have no physical feet. So you hear footprints, you hear them screaming your name. Sounds like Aunt Ruth. You don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You know, I think that when you're visited by loved ones shortly after they died, it's probably legitimate, because they do make the rounds. But if you're visited by loved ones, 3 years later, I get suspicious. I think it's a legitimate concern that you can't authenticate what you have. There's no way to physically measure it accurately, reliably.
Okay. Moving along. This is from Bill in New York. And he says, is there anything a person at home can do to find out if a spirit is present, and like any simple devices or equipment?
Mm-hmm. Okay, once again, I don't really believe in equipment. Sorry. I know a lot of people do. I mean, my approach is a psychic approach. I go on impressions, and I think that you go into a room and a room is cold. That's usually an indicator that it's haunted. There's a spirit there. Maybe a corner of the room will be cold, and you don't see a hole in a window, so you reason that it's just unnaturally cold. Or you go into a part of a building and it feels really creepy. It feels, let me explain what creepy to me is. You go into a portion of the building and it's extremely, feels empty, I guess is the way. People who do energy healing will understand this. There's just an emptiness. There's an anomaly. You feel a ripple in the energy lines that go through that area. There's something there that's just not right. And so many times you'll get a physical reaction where you'll start to feel something in the back of your neck, like a little tingling, or your hairs will start to rise in the back of your head. And usually it's cold, or sometimes it's a bad odor. A very strange odor. So you're looking for anomalies that can't be explained readily by anything in the room, like a broken window, decaying fruit, or anything like that would explain why it's unusually odorous or cold or creepy feeling.
I always get this really bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, like I'm going to be sick.
Yeah.
Like in the really bad ones, it's like, I'm going to throw up. You're like, are you okay? It's like, no, It's just my little it's really active here, meter.
Yeah, that's the worst when you're going into a haunted building and you confront it and you think you got it, you think you know what it is, and you feel a certain comfort level, and then you realize you don't understand at all what you have. That's when the stomach goes flip flop.
Exactly. Okay, so this is from Tiffany, who had a million questions before, but I haven't scrolled for a while. And she wanted to know why ghosts don't like salt. But maybe you should explain the whole salt thing, because I don't even get the salt thing personally.
I don't either. And my teacher said, bring salt. And she said, form a continuous line of salt around the building, and that would keep it out. I don't know. I mean, maybe it has something to do with the silicon life of physical life. I don't know what the salt is. Maybe it's superstition. I don't know. I don't know the answer, but it is part of it. And you can salt a building and keep spirits. You bound them from the building with salt. That's was my training, and I think that's a common use of salt. But yes, that is a typical. A traditional way to combat spirits gone awry, stubborn spirits, tricks for the reluctant spirit. Salt, I don't know. And so I asked my teacher, what kind of salt? I said, kosher salt. She said, that would be good. I said, sea salt? She said, that would be good. I said, what if I just use table salt? She said, that would be good. So I don't know. I would always go for the kosher salt, of course.
Well, it just... You know, a lot of the things that they have you do in different traditions, it always makes me wonder, does it have to do with the tool, or does it have to do with the intention that's applied when utilizing the tool that really is the active device?
Ooh, now we're into magic. This is what I really like. Yes, it's the intention. Yes, the intention. So, I think you're really onto something. I don't think that salt is really much of a barrier, but if you think it is, and you can project that it is, you can project that confidence that it is. You know, it is like sympathetic magic. You know, pretty soon the feather becomes the bird, and the bird symbolizes something much more than just a bird in flight. So you're really dealing with archetypes and symbolism and magical symbols and imagery. So I think it is the intent. It is the intent of the person doing it, and projecting your own energetic force of will, if you will.
Stay away.
Yeah, go away. yeah. So many times I say, can I help you? And the only response is, go away. And it's like, well, that's not very friendly.
So this is a question from Lorraine, and actually it's a very interesting question, a different take. And her question is, a large part of Halloween is about honoring the dead.
Yeah.
Since you can sense spirits, do you know if the prayers, candle lightings, and offerings that are done at that time of year are received by them?
Sure, I'm sure they can be. You know, part of the Celtic tradition of All Hallows Eve, as I understand it, is that you, first of all, that the veil between the worlds, the crack between the worlds of physical world and the spirit world, is thinnest at that time of year. And the tradition then is that spirits could come through. Well, we're talking about spirits that come through anytime they feel like it. But at that time, there would be probably more spirits coming through. So the likelihood of seeing ghosts or other spirits at Halloween time by the Celtic tradition of All Hallows Eve would be wow, it would be great. So you know, people would typically leave bits of food, you know, or candles. Or you know, little altars for their loved ones, because the idea, as I understand it, isn't to call them into your home and into your life at Halloween, but knowing that the veil would be thin at this time of year, recognizing that they would come through, peek into our world, and that you would kind of buy them off with a bit of food and a candle, and they'd be good with that and go. So I mean, kind of in Mexico they have Day of the Dead. When the dead would appear, and you'd also want to put out offering of food and candles, not to entice them to come into your life and haunt you, but to buy them off so they go away, basically.
Yeah, go away. Okay, so this is another Tiffany question, and an interesting one. Can ghosts haunt from past lives?
Wow, that's...
I have a great chat room.
Amazing. Well, I just did a workshop where I encountered a woman has had a ghost fragment glomming onto her and following her everywhere, physically attaching itself to her everywhere she goes. And this has been going on for some time. And, that gets to be really, really creepy, because you think at some point they need to get on with the future. They just can't be hanging around. It is really, really extra creepy. So past life ghosting, gosh, I don't know. I am drawing a blank there. I'm going to guess no, though.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I have worked with people that have had attached entities, so I guess that would be kind of a ghost.
Yep.
That have been, the relationship was established in a past life and they still were being plagued. But that is so rare, so rare.
Well, I think for people who believe in reincarnation, it's not unrealistic to think that the ghost fragment of a person who's still here is probably relates to or belongs to a life entity, a spirit that has gone on and started a new life. So in effect, yes, you're dealing with somebody's past life, and while they might have actually started physically yet a new life. So, isn't this part of like shamanic soul retrieval? There are little bits of us left everywhere. We have to retrieve them. So that goes into past lives as well. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Not a happy thought.
No. All right. So this is kind of on the same topic. I'm just going to read it. And it's from Bill again. What is the difference between reincarnation and possession involving a new biological host?
Wow.
Like, okay, that one's all yours.
Wow. Well, I think they're entirely different things. Reincarnation would be someone whose life essence, life force, or spirit, or soul, or whatever you want to call it, this energy part of you, which is eternal, has gone on and started a new life. It may have very little memory of the past life. There are a few people who have been documented that did have very good memory of past lives. And we assume that these were, in fact, their past lives, although, it could have been group memory, cosmic soul kind of thing. But then I think the other part of that was, as I understand it, possession of a person.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be like a walk-in sort of thing, let's say, where a spirit walks into you and inhabits you. That is that's a whole different thing. That isn't a new life. That is a restless spirit that has not reincarnated into a new life, but has tried to piggyback onto another one. My teacher, my psychic teacher, Louise, he cautioned me about going into the spirit realm and coming back without any hitchhikers. He said, it's like a train station there, and everyone's just arrived, and nobody knows the schedule, nobody knows the tracks, nobody knows the transfers, and they all get off the train and they're all wandering around, And then lo and behold, you got a hitchhiker coming back with you when you finally do get on your next ride. So you can certainly encounter restless spirits, but this is not the way reincarnation is supposed to work with the life between lives, where you would analyze. I don't know if people have seen the movie Defending Your Life, but it's a cute movie with Meryl Streep where between your lives you would go to a place where you'd have to be determine whether you are going to start yet a new life afresh, whether you can move on, or whether you have to go back and repeat a grade, that you didn't do well, and go back and repeat various aspects of that life. But the idea is that soul then, that divine spark, then inhabits a whole new person as a new creature, not as a disembodied, restless spirit. It's a fresh start. They're different things.
Well, and I would think that if it was a walk-in or some spirit that was taking control of the body, that spirit would have its life memories, and the person who owned the body would have their life memories.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be where the screen was washed clean like we experienced when we were born.
Yeah, and also in that case, like a walk-in or a possession, it doesn't happen at birth. You just might be walking down the street and suddenly there's two of you inside, Or what happened to me once, that I was going to sleep and I said, I think that I sensed something in the room, and I said out loud, I said, someone else could probably do more with this life than me. And suddenly there were two different people who had jumped inside my body, and I had to exorcise them out, and it was very unpleasant. So I think there are a lot of spirits out there trying to. The thing about restless spirits that don't reincarnate in a normal manner like this is that they're going to jump into an existing life, not in a baby's body, and they're just going to take over your life in mid-course. When you have a job and you have a house and you got your driver's license and you're way past puberty and all that nasty stuff is gone, and the good years are ahead, and then they jump in and then they take over your life. They basically steal your life, and it's pretty awful. It happens.
But from what I understand, usually if that happens, the person really doesn't want to be here anyway, or they were very ill, or they try to commit suicide. Like, they really create the opportunity for the spirit to step in, and it's not that there isn't some kind of an agreement.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, I just have my own little experience. I think I was at a vulnerable time, and I actually thought, this wouldn't be bad. It is the people who have given up on their life, and they want someone else to steer the ship. Many times on my sailboat, I've wanted someone else to steer the ship, but really, it's pretty ugly because you don't know which way they're going to steer it.
So when someone passes, how do they know how to get to the other side? Could some of the spirits that are left here be left here because there's no rule book or guidebook? And could that number that don't make it to the other side actually be bigger than we think?
Oh, yeah, like the opportunity of when to get in, they get impatient. Maybe they're bucking the line, and maybe it's not their spot. They just jump in. That's certainly a possibility.
But I mean, do they know, like, when we pass, do we know that? Okay, so when my husband was getting ready to transition, even before that, when he was diagnosed, I just looked at him. I mean, I said it to him over and over again because, I'm weird that way. I go, I don't care what you do. I don't want you to hang around waiting for me. I just
Right.
want you to go to the light. Go to the
Right.
light, Wayne. Go to the light. And I just would say that to him over and over again.
Yeah, there's a hypnotherapist, I think he's out in California, named Newton. He's written some really great books
Oh,
on
Michael Newton.
Michael Newton. He's written some really great books on life between lives, and he's interviewed many, many people like that. And there does seem to be kind of a procedure that when you die, that you go through some kind of a life review, and I don't know. And then you get into like the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I think it's a startling thing to face your death, but you really need to, and you need to avoid becoming a greasy stain over a diner and hanging around as an unwanted malevolent spirit. You really need to plan emotionally, mentally, spiritually, on all levels to make the transition, the crossing, smoothly, and recognize that you are going to die, and it's going to get black, and then you're gonna move forward, and I think the people who have a lot of trouble with that are the people probably who commit suicide. They haven't thought it out, or the people who are suddenly they die in an accident or they're murdered. They haven't in any way prepared themselves to die. And in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Buddhists seem to believe that you need to kind of rehearse or practice how to walk through this maze to get to the other side, and that there are going to be lots of things. There are going to be things pulling on you, demons, and it's some of it's illusion and some of it's real, but it's confusing for a lot of people when they die to simply walk to the light, whatever the light is, but to make the transition effort without effort, and to do it completely, fully, so that all parts of you leave in an orderly fashion. But so I knew a fella who worked in a hospice in New York, and he wrote a wonderful book, Anton Gross. He wrote a book called Letters to a Dying Friend a few years ago. And it was based on helping hospice people face the end of their life, and using the Tibetan Book of the Dead as rehearsing, so that when you die, you know that you're going to have to, navigate your way through a certain labyrinth to get there, and that it would not be confusing to you, and that you would be on all levels, emotionally and mentally and spiritually, ready to make the crossing.
Yeah, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I always thought it was similar to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which it's not at all. And I just found it fascinating where where they were telling the loved ones, you sit with the body. You tell them that they're dead. You remind them for 7 days that they're dead, or something like that, and so that they don't linger.
I think it's really smart, and I believe this is a Jewish tradition as well, to sit with the body. Is it not?
No. Jewish tradition is that they're buried within 24 hours.
Oh, within 24 hours.
But they sit Shiva for a week, and they reminisce, and in the home. So I think it might have some kind of parallel.
Some kind of parallel. That there's some period where you're concerned about it. Mm-hmm. No matter what you do with the bones or whatnot, that you're actually helping them move on. I think that's important, to help them move on, and that's part of the Tibetan tradition too. Is that when someone dies, everyone gets together and tries to help them move on. Because it's probably not easy for everyone.
Okay, I'm looking at the clock, and we need to go to a break. Okay?
Okay.
So there's still more questions in the chat room that I haven't answered, and I have questions of my own, but let's come back. This is a great conversation. I'm loving it. So
okay.
All right, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to Von Braschler about his book, Confessions of a Reluctant Ghost Hunter. And we'll be back with Von after these words from our sponsors. Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading our free 50-page guide. It's also brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer. So, let's get back with Von. We're here talking to Von Braschler about his book, Confessions of a Reluctant Ghost Hunter. There's a link to get to his webpage, but the URL is way too long for me to say. But if you'd like to get a hold of Von, please do check out his Facebook page. So you would just go to Von Braschler on Facebook. That was easy. Von, so when we went to break, well, we were kind of talking about a lot of different things. So let me just... let's see. Let's start easy and we'll just kind of go see where we end up going. You've talked about being able to see spirits since you were very young. So what was some of your earliest psychic experience, or not psychic experience, but ghost experiences?
Yeah. Well, I remember... trying to think here how far back you want to go.
So wherever you want to go, to the, like some cool old ones,
Oh, cool old one. I think that I'd seen them a lot as a child, but it would always be like a streak. I never put it all together. I would see like streaky lights, or I'd see out of the corner of my eye, I would see some darting movement, or I'd hear something when I go into a building and I'd say, "Did you hear that? Did you hear that?" And so, I mean, that happened even when I was a boy, but I don't think it really connected in my head, being a slow developing child, until I was probably in my 20s. And then I started to they just started popping in the room, and I would see them, and I would just, say, well, okay, and I'd walk around them, so I would say really conscious of it in my early 20s, but then by the time, well, most of these things happened when I was in my mid-30s, and then it was like happening like all the time, But I was in kind of an enchanted place where spirits, I think there was like a thin veil. I think there was actually a power vortex, and was what it was. And I think in this area on Mount Hood in Oregon, the spirits would come and go through these little cracks in the worlds quite easily. And there were a lot of people who saw things, not just me. Well, let me give you an example.
Okay.
I had a neighbor who wrote books for children. You could look this up. Omar, I think it was Omarr. And I said, well, how did you ever come up with of course I'm trying to interview him. And I said, how did you ever come up with the pen name of Omar? And he said, oh, I'm not Omar. I said, well, who is Omar? He said, well, Omar is... Well, it's hard to explain Omar. He said, I'll introduce you. And so we walk, and we go around the corner. We live kind of in the same wooded area, not a lot of houses. And we get to his house, and there's a big log in front of his house. And he sits down on the log, and he pats the log beside him, and I sit down, and he said, meet Omar. I said, this log? And he said, well, he was a tree when I first met him. Now, a lot of the children up there, and friends of my son, they would actually talk to the trees, and a lot of us would see Native Americans that had actually lived there, and probably died there either in the flood or it was a kind of a summer area near Warm Springs, and there were a lot of native sightings. There were a lot of Barlow Trail, Oregon settler ghost sightings right near my house. It was, as I say, it was kind of a power vortex. And there were a lot of ghostly sightings. And so I saw them early on, but it really never became easy for me to hook it all up until I was in my early 20s, like I'd say 2021. Then I started really, noticing when there was a ghost in the room, and I couldn't explain it away, and I just had to actually. When there's this expression, it became part of my moving reality. It was part of my everyday reality, and I couldn't just any longer just push it away and say, "Oh, it's just something that doesn't matter," or it's just one way of looking at it, or even it's just my imagination. But if you think of it, imagination is imagineering, so imagination is a pretty powerful thing. But I think that it's something that a lot of children do have, and I didn't have it developed as did my son and some of his friends at an early age where I could actually, let's say, have conversations with ghosts.
I would always think, why would you want to?
Why would you want to? That was my whole feeling. Why would you want to? I said, they're so creepy, and they don't have much to say to me, and they I don't see how they're part of this whole scheme. So I'll just pretend that they weren't there.
When someone believes their home is haunted, is it, or could there be some, but they're feeling stuff going on, maybe experiencing stuff, or could there be something else happening in that location?
Yeah, my teacher, Helen, she said, well, a lot of times she would go out to a house and they'd say, the house is haunted. And she'd have to finally come back and say to them, really, your house isn't haunted. You're scaring yourself. You're hearing things and you're just assuming it might be haunted, but it really isn't haunted. So a lot of times people will think their house is haunted and it isn't. Moreover, there are spirits in a lot of buildings, more numerous than most of us are ready to admit, meaning that there are other dimensional beings that are very often occupying the same general area, but outside of our eyesight, because they are operating in a different dimension, unseen to us, and they don't slip through that quickly. So very, very many buildings would have spirits in them, but to say that they're haunted buildings is kind of a stretch, because what is a haunting? My teacher, Helen, she said, well, when you have a reluctant spirit, or one that's bothersome, or one that just refuses to acknowledge people and play fair, well, then you have a haunting. So not in every case where you have a spirit in a building is it truly haunted. It's only a haunting if it's haunting people.
Ooh, I like that one. Because there's like ghosts that are here in this house.
There's all kinds of spirits all around us.
But they don't spook me.
No, there's all kinds of spirits all around us. There are deceased people, and there are elementals, and probably space aliens, and all kinds of things. But they just can't cross over because they're interdimensional, and they're not able to pierce the veil into this physical world so easily, nor do they probably want to.
Exactly. How come we don't see, when someone goes into a location or whatever, not really tied to a location, but why don't we really ever see like pilgrim ghosts or Native American ghosts or, ghosts of dinosaurs or anything like that?
Dinosaurs would be good. I like that one. Well, actually, I have seen early settler ghosts. We had a number of sightings where I lived in Brightwood, Oregon, on Mount Hood, which was my house was built near the old Barlow Trail, where they would come over the Salmon River. And if you can flash back to when they made country time commercials in the river, that was where it was. That was where they used to lower the wagons. It was a shortcut. And they'd lower the wagons into the river off the cliff, and then they would ford the river, and they'd come to the Oregon side, which is now the Oregon side, as opposed to the other side of the gorge, which would now be Washington. And they would go through the woods. They would go across Mount Hood. And one of these 5 trails was called the Barlow Trail, and it was near my home. Well, many of us would see settlers leaning against a wagon, exhausted, toward the end of the day, just before dusk. It would be a very typical sighting. And at the foot of the mountain, very often in the summertime, just at dusk, you would see early pioneers walking out of a barn in single file with old homemade rakes and shovels and hoes, and they would be wearing black clothing, and they would carry these things over their shoulder, these homemade tools, and they would walk out of the barn into the field, and when they got to a certain place in the field, they would just disappear. So there's that, and then we would see, once I had a Native American just pop into my bedroom up in Brightwood, and he was magnificent. I mean, I don't know, maybe he was a shaman, because he was really decked out, and he had feathers and beads, and he was just splendid. And he was very tall, and he was wearing an elaborate ceremonial outfit, and he just popped in at the top of the stairs leading to my bedroom on the second floor. And there at the top of the stair landing, as I'm rounding the corner, he just popped in, and we stared at each other. And the odd thing is, he was as startled to see me as I was to see him. And I just started screaming. I said, "This is my house. I order you out of my house. This is not your house. This is the house of people who live here. You do not live here." I said, "You must leave. Leave now." And he had this like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," look, and he disappeared. So that was my only Native American sighting. But pioneers, I've seen pioneers. Would love to see a dinosaur. That would be special.
I know. I mean, there's so many things that I think would be. I've seen Native Americans periodically, but no dinosaurs. No. I mean, that's the part that I find interesting. Like, I have seen pets,
Yeah.
but I've never seen and actually, I have seen bison ghosts.
Oh, wow.
But that's kind of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
As far as like animal kingdom stuff,
Yeah.
you would think around like a cattle slaughter place, or where they do the chickens, that there'd be all kinds of
I have heard
energy.
I have heard that people, a couple of people who worked in slaughterhouses, and nobody likes to admit they did, and most of them don't stay there long because they get very depressed, or they go crazy. But they would say that the place seemed haunted by, it could be empty at some point between, times when they would bring the animals in to be butchered, and it would still seem that it was haunted to them. It just seemed like the pale of death, the pallor of death, just hung over the room. And very unsettling place to work. So, places where people have died, like prisons and concentration camps, and you often hear of people talking about ghosts there, because these are very unhappy people that now are haunting the place.
I mean, I've heard lots of stories about like in hospitals or jails or insane asylums, which would make a lot of sense because there's a lot of emotional energy happening in those places.
Yeah. I think that's probably the key when you die abruptly, and then there's an emotional split, and then your lower emotional body and your lower personality just stay here. And so you become a kind of an empty vessel, fragment of a person. And then typically that spirit, that ghost, would be very disoriented as a result. So it's very unfortunate. Doesn't happen probably to very many people.
Thank God.
Thank God. So I think it's really important to think about, the inevitable, that we'll all physically die, this life here now, and to prepare ourselves for a clean departure. I don't want to.
And I don't think a lot of people think about that.
No.
About making that transition. They get all scared, and and maybe they don't recognize that it is a transition, and they just feel like they're just not going to exist anymore. But then they're going to go to heaven. I don't know.
I think a lot of people probably in their darkest hour think that, what if there's nothing after that, because there's nothing in your immediate frame of reference to tell you. You have a feeling, some of us have a thought about it, but there's not anything in your immediate frame of reference to tell you just exactly where you're going, It's like, finding your way to the grocery store, you've never been there. So how do you find your way? No map, So a lot of people worry about that, but it is just transition. And I think that realistically, death lasts just an instant, You're dead and then you're not dead, So,
it's like being not born and born, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is a transition. So, it's not like when you die, you're forever dead. It's like,
Tiffany had a question. I kind of asked her a question back, but she wanted to know if there could be portals in people's homes, and her comment, and I think maybe this is the piece to answer. I get way too many random weird visitors. So what kind of things would make your home, kind of like a crossroads for a ghost to hang out?
There probably is a portal, some kind of a vortex or an energy line there. There are places like that. And they'll always be probably conducive to comings and goings in the spiritual realm. I know of a church around here like that. You can find some very bizarre things happening in the sanctuary, which doesn't make me want to sit there and spend an afternoon. But it probably is a magnetic. Like a magnetic power line there. Yeah, there's a place near here that I participated in a function. It's called Burlington, Wisconsin, and there's a Burlington vortex. And here's the thing about the Burlington vortex. It's like a huge burial ground, and the tradition in Burlington was that people gather there at Halloween, and they go out into the woods, and they see very many strange things out in the woods. There's distortions, and pictures don't turn out right, and things are elongated, and there's obviously some kind of a power vortex there. But on top of that is the bit of history that it was an ancient burial grounds. Until fairly recently, it was thought that it was the burial ground of Native Americans who had lived there. But actually, the Native Americans have oral history of people who had lived there before them and died. called what do they call them? The tall red-headed people. I don't know. Maybe they were Vikings.
Oh, the giants.
The giants, yes, the giants. Yeah, you've heard this. So they're redheaded.
Well, when I hear tall, redheaded people, Native American, I go, "Oh, the giants."
The giants, and sometimes in where Native American tomahawks are on display, you'll look closely at the tomahawk and you'll see some red hair embedded in the tomahawk.
Really?
Yeah. So they were eventually wiped out. And so these burial mounds that we have in North America had once been thought to be the burial grounds of Native Americans, but in fact, actually, they were burial grounds in many cases of an earlier race that had lived there, the giants. So anyway, so you go to Burlington for the Burlington Vortex Conference every Halloween, and strange things happen. And I stayed at a hotel, and I asked our host who set us up with the room, I said, why did you put us in that hotel? Because the hotel is haunted. She said, every place in this town is haunted. And it's true. There's some kind of a power vortex there. There are places in the earth that are just conducive for this sort of thing. And it could be that you have a portal in your home, and that'll never change. You'll just have to deal with it or move.
Well, and that was, Tiffany wrote something about she lives near a hospital and down the block from a cemetery. I'm like, so I just posted vortex, and then you started talking about vortex, so we're on the same page.
Well, the thing about the cemetery, this makes me think more and more, not to get off the subject, but more and more about the value of cremation, because these cemeteries are very often haunted. People do seem drawn to their physical remains. As long as there are physical remains, they feel that they have a place on the earth, And I certainly don't want to be buried in one of these places because it's haunted.
Ooh, spooky.
Yeah.
Okay, hang on a second, because we had a couple more questions. This is from Analog Hole, so I've been waiting for his questions all night. Does Vaughn believe that living near a cemetery could cause potential hauntings? Oops.
Yes, yes. The answer is yes. And to follow up to our last conversation, I just remembered a time when I was less than 20 years old. I was an adolescent, and a friend and I thought it would be really, really fun to haunt a cemetery near our home on Halloween night. So we put sheets over us, and we threw some hose or rakes or something over our shoulder for effect, and we wandered around the cemetery at night. And let me tell you, we saw some things out there that were not quite normal. The cemetery was haunted. It didn't need us to haunt it. So yeah, I can recall seeing ghosts in a cemetery at a young age.
Oh, yeah. I grew up around the block from a cemetery, and we used to play ball in the cemetery. It was from the late 1700s, early 1800s, and a bunch of the tombstones were knocked down, and except at night. And then if I had to walk down the street, I would cross the street, walk down the block, and then cross back across the street so I didn't have to walk next to the cemetery, because it's spooky and it got ghosts in there.
Yeah, I think it really does.
Or, but one of the other things is, there is the potential of the dead people, but then there's all the family emotional energy, and I don't know which is worse.
That's true, too. You have emotional energy bodies floating around. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're both pretty creepy.
Yeah, they both are. All right, here's a great question from Bill in New York, and he says, can a person who exhibits depression or other physical signs be a victim to a soul vampire? A soul vampire.
Wow. And quick answer, sadly, yes. Maybe you want to talk about this too, Rita. You probably have experience. I've talked to people like this, and it's a very unhappy situation where there would be a soul vampire basically attaching itself to you because you are vulnerable. You don't have the emotional and mental energy to expel it. Basically you're just you're kind of asleep at the switch, and someone else just comes along and grabs the rudder. So yeah, this is a sad situation. But we also have to remember that in mental hospitals, the things that people typically will describe having seen, their hallucinations, are remarkably similar patient to patient. And there have been some interesting books of people that have gotten into the inside of a mental hospital to check this out. One was written by the great witch Sybil Leek. She wrote a great book where she put herself inside the Bellevue and she wandered around, and then she had trouble getting out, of course, because when you're in and you say, I don't belong here, they say, right, of course you don't. And she went in as a journalist, and she said that it was just remarkable, because she was extremely psychic, that people would, they were weak, they were mentally weak, but they were seeing something, and spirits were coming to them because they were weak, and they were vulnerable.
Well, and I think that people that are diagnosed with schizophrenia, certain forms of schizophrenia, and certain other mental disorders, I think are truly seeing spirits. And we just say that they're crazy. It's like, no.
I agree.
No.
They really are seeing spirits, and they kind of open themselves up to it by not exerting a strong will center in themselves. But it's not to say that they're hallucinating. They are seeing spirits.
Mm-hmm. I believe that. Well, we have a little under a half hour left, and I was hoping you could share some of stories that you tell in your book, because some of them were pretty creepy, and it is Halloween, and I feel like I should get a little cup of hot cocoa with marshmallows and my blankie, and just curl up and listen. And so
I might need a stiff drink afterward.
I'm sorry.
I've tried to repress these so I can let them go. Yeah. So I describe in the book, after I talk about all the wonderful ghosts I've known who just, play with us and don't bother us. And then I talk about 3 difficult hauntings that really kind of turned me off it. And they all happened in Mount Hood. And one was a church. I went into a church, a very large church. It occupied a whole square block in Portland, just on the edge of Gresham and Portland. I think it's probably now Portland. And it was a brick building, and it was old, and one of the members was a friend of mine and said, that church is haunted, and it would be great if you could go there on the weekend and see if you can find it and get it out. And I said, well, if you think it's important, I'll give it a shot. So I went in there on a Saturday, and I ended up getting locked in the building because I didn't tell anybody. It was such a big church that you could just wander around. You didn't have to check in at the office or get a badge or anything. You just wandered around. And lo and behold, I get locked in the church with this ghost. And everywhere I went, it would always be in the next room. It kept evading me. And finally, I salt the building around it, and I put the stakes and the 4 cardinal points, and I call on the archangels and the watchtower to come and protect the building and all of this. And then I get in the car, and he said, "Well, did you get it?" And I said, "No, I never really got it. I knew it was always there, but it kept moving ahead of me, and it was frustrating because I could never find it." I said, maybe it's not even haunted. And then as we're driving away, I look up at the top of the big church, and a light starts flickering on and off. It's like saying goodbye, sucker. So yeah, that was a ghost that did not want to be found, but that wasn't so scary. I could have lived through that. I could have lived through that one. But then a woman came and knocked on my door, and she said that her sister had been missing. And these were ladies in their mid-20s, and it was kind of sad. Her sister had come to the mountain from Portland, Oregon, and she was kind of trying to find herself out there. And people sometimes do that. Sometimes they climb the mountain and they find themselves that way. In her case, she was just wandering around. And she went into this one little town called Sleepy Hollow. Well, Sleepy Hollow was, it had some nice things. We had the Bionic Woman live there. And my son would always sell her photographs. She was wonderful. And we had, we had some other people that were kind of private, but, it was a kind of a mountain enclave. And anyway, there was a little chapel up there, a little church in the woods. It was kind of like built out of like logs, as I recall. It was a chapel in the woods, and she said that her sister, the last she'd heard, her sister had gone to this chapel in the woods at Sleepy Hollow. And so that wasn't very far from where I lived in Brightwood. So I went over there and looked at it, and they were very reluctant. There were some old ladies that were in this church, and they did something like faith healing, where they would jump up and down on your body and chant and scare the bejesus out of you. And we tested that out. We had somebody go through and get a healing from them, and he wouldn't talk about it, and he wouldn't go back. But they at first denied that they'd ever met this girl, and then later on they said, yeah, she'd come through, but she didn't stay. Well, then this lady started getting calls from her sister, and the calls were kind of like the calls that my brother made to my sister when he died. She was screaming, and she's irrational, and she's screaming, calling her sister's name and asking for help me. And then the line would go dead, and this happened. And so she asked me if I knew anything about her sister, and she thought maybe I could help her. So I said, well, I'll see what I can do. And so I was looking at that initially from the point of view of a community newspaper man, and I thought I would go and interview the ladies at the chapel, and then I would see what I could find if there was a missing person report, with the deputies, the Clackamas County deputies. And no, we couldn't find her. And then there were decapitations of birds. These were large birds, very large birds.
Decapitation of birds?
Yes, these were
like someone
large.
Actually cut their head off?
Yeah, these were large endangered species.
Are you kidding?
And which made the superintendent of schools very mad, because these were run up the flagpole in the summertime. And he went out to the school, and school wasn't in session, and he looks at the flagpole, and somebody had run these dead, decapitated birds up the flagpole. And so we have the deputies out there, and they're trying to figure this out, and the crime seemed to be that someone had killed endangered species, and this was really, really bothersome. So then I checked with the deputies the next day to see if they knew anything, had any leads on these strange bird mutilations, and they said, there was a decapitated body the very next day, showed up in a lake. Well, they couldn't immediately identify the woman, and then over a period of time, they were able to identify her as the missing girl. And that she had been there a long, long time, which was why it was hard to identify who she was. Well, this made it very interesting, because then my neighbor had actually received calls from a dead girl because the calls had been made after the body had supposedly been decapitated and dumped in the lake. So as we investigated that further, and starting to put pressure on who we thought might know something about it, namely the people in the chapel in the woods, which probably are nice ladies. I mean, it's an unsolved mystery. It could have had nothing to do with them. But I would be in my house and I'd be looking up at the skylight, and I would look up at the skylight lying on the carpet in the living room, and I'd look up there at night and I'd see faces staring down at me, and I thought, oh, that's really creepy. But I'd seen so many creepy ghosts and things through the years that I just kind of ignored it. Like, well, just ignore them and they'll go away, right?
Uh-huh.
But then
well, you can always hope.
You can always hope. But then my son comes over and sees them, and then a friend of mine, photography friend, comes over and sees them, and I said, "Oh, you must be imagining things. How could there be a head bobbing, floating above the roof like that? It doesn't make any sense." And they're looking down, and I think I recognize them, and it's really creepy. So I go looking for my ghost teacher, Helen. I said, I was going to say, "There's something you didn't tell me, Helen." So
there'd
she's
be floating heads over my house.
Yeah. This was not in her instructions. Certainly not in the notes I took. So I go there, and she's gone because her family needed her, and she'd moved out of state. But lo and behold, my old teacher Louise is there, and he said, this is really, really a good lesson for you, because there are things in the spirit realm that are really, really dangerous. And I said, I don't think they're dangerous, but they just really creep me out. And he said, well, what have they done? He said, they can't hurt you. What have they done? And I said, well, I ignored them as long as I could. And then I would go to sleep at night, and then and then I would get up in the morning, and then everything that had been in drawers in my bedroom was on the floor, and everything that had been on the floor was now in the drawers. In short, the room was all disheveled. So I would ignore this, and I would go into the bathroom, and I'd shave and brush my teeth, and I'd come out, and the room was perfectly put together. And I'm thinking, this is really beginning to bother me now, because when they can do this to my house, and then the things started coming up missing in the house, and I'd tear the whole house apart, and it would be exactly the first place I looked. So somebody was messing with me, and so I went out and talked to Louis, and he told me some really helpful advice on how to protect yourself and to deal with situations like that, which is basically just send pure love and let them deal with it.
Well, and so many people, let me just interrupt you a second.
Yeah.
So many people try to do the get away, I command you to go. And please state that again and why that's important, because I think that is so important.
Well, this is why I think this guy is just the most gifted teacher I've ever encountered. He said, love is the most, he said, I'm going to tell you something that is very simple but very profound. He said, love is the strongest force in the universe. And I said, yeah, He said, no. He said, it is the strongest force in all of creation. And I said, He says, you're not grasping the message. He said, love is a powerful force. And I said, well, I was just hoping you could teach me how to wrap myself in stronger bands of blue light. This is what we did, my friends and I. So he said, no. He says, this is what you do. He said, you clear your mind, and then you picture the purest love that you can. And then when you have that, then you think of those people that are haunting you in this fashion, and send it out to them. And I should mention that these people, these bobbing heads, seem to resemble living people in town. So I'm saying they're not like traditional spirits. They were like spirit bodies of living people. This is a little different. But anyway, his instruction was to think of them, and then send this love to them. Send it to them, like a thought form. And I said, well, what will they do with it? And he said, that's not your concern. You've given them pure love. They can do most anything with it. He said, it's their karma what they choose to do with it. And I did that. And the chapel in the woods burned down that same night. So that could be just a coincidence. And by the way, I never burned down a building in my life, so don't blame that on me. But anyway, as he said, it's karma free. I now refer to that as the rubber band karma. It really won't come back to you. It's not like a rubber band at all. So anyway, that was a very sad tale. And then I met an herbalist up there who was a Native American, and she and her daughter organized these herbal walks on Mount Hood. And we met them when we were my son and I, mushroom hunting in rhododendron in the Mount Hood National Forest. And this is a really wonderful place for looking for chanterelles. Commercial pickers go up there, and in an hour or two, they can fill a great big box of these mushrooms. And so we'd go out and pick them. And we met the herbalist and her daughter, and she told us about how they'd lived in the woods, and now they did these herbal walks. And so she took me on an herbal walk, and I really loved it. And part of it was that she would release me in the woods, and then I had to report everything I'd seen and done and eaten. And then she said, well, we're not going to release you in the woods just yet, because my first encounter was rather bad. I got things a little bit wrong. Anyway, she organized one for my son and gave him a certificate. So she was a really nice person. And she would camp. She'd have a campfire in front of the trailer house where she lived. And she would cook up some of these herbs, these pot herbs, and she taught us how to make this kind of bread where you have these pot herbs, and then you string it around a stick like a campfire stick, and you toast it. Anyway, she told me one day that her trailer house seemed to be haunted. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, my daughter, she draws in her book. She has a sketchbook. She draws these pictures of herbs that we've seen, and they're very accurate. And then she colors them, and then she labels them. And we're going to get to where, when you go through herbal training with me, we'll use these illustrations, because these are the actual herbs that are appearing here regularly on Mount Hood. So it's important to have a local directory. And but her daughter, she said, would sit on her bed in the trailer house and talk to an invisible girl. And when questioned, her daughter told her that it was a little girl with golden curls. And she described her as young, which we took to being around 9 or 10 maybe. And I said, well, no one's ever seen her? I said, she's probably just an imaginary playmate, because she didn't have any neighbors. They lived in the middle of nowhere. Now, they lived in a trailer house, a single-wide trailer that the man who owned it was unable to sell or lease or rent to anyone. So he asked Todd and the herbalist and her daughter and their little dog to live there, kind of like the house set, free. And then he felt, it was the trailer would be in good hands and wouldn't fall into, disarray or vandalism. And so they were living there totally free. Now, he was unemployed, Todd, and so they lived in the woods, and so this was probably a good thing for them. So I said, well, I'll talk to your daughter about the little girl, but she's probably just an imaginary playmate. And she says, well, she says that the girl doesn't like us very much, and just doesn't like me or my husband, and doesn't like the little dog very much. And I said, well, she's probably just projecting her own, using psychology, just projecting her own thoughts on this imaginary playmate. But I'll talk to her. And I said, anything else odd strike you about the house? He said, well, we've never seen the little girl, but there is something else. When we go to sleep at the back of the trailer in their bedroom, something would strangle us in the middle of the night. We'd wake up. And it would usually be my husband, Todd. And I'd shake him, and he'd scream, and I'd shake him, and we'd go outside. And that would be it. I said, you never saw anyone? No. Did he ever have any marks on him? And he said, no. I said, well, maybe just having a bad dream. She said, it's happened many times, and he's very sure someone's trying to strangle him. And I said, well, I don't know. It's probably just living out here in the woods. It's beginning to scare you. But I went in the trailer anyway, and I brought my little bag of tricks that Helen had taught me to bring, and I'm looking for the little girl. And I'm walking through the trailer, and I can't find the little girl, but I sense something. So I try turning off the light, and then I'm walking with the flashlight. And finally, I turn off all the lights, and I'm walking with the flashlight, and it's pointing down to my feet. I'm going through this narrow hallway. Now, the hallway leads from the entrance where the little girl sleeps in the kitchen in the entry down to the back of the trailer where the herbalist and her husband have the bedroom. And stashed in this narrow hallway on one side against the wall is a washer and a dryer. So I walk through the trailer one time and I see nothing, and I go out and I report to them, because I always ask people, wait outside. And so I go out and they say, did you see anything? And I said, no, not yet, but I'll look again. And so I know there's something there, but it's just avoiding me. And so finally I start out, I don't normally do this, but I started audibly calling out to it, kind of luring it and saying, come here, I'm a friend of Missy. She told me that about the book and how you write in the book with her and draw with her. And Missy's my friend, and she said that it would be all right if you could talk to me. And I'm trying to do this. And I'm walking through the trailer the second time. And the flashlight is pointing at my feet, and I'm kind of wandering through the darkness of this hallway. And I bump up against the dryer and the washer. And then I look up, and there's something there, sitting on the dryer. And it's not a little girl with golden curls. It's dark, and it has long legs and long arms, and it's kind of hideous looking. And it has a nasty sneer and red eyes. And it's just glowering. It's looking down at me with scorn and contempt. And I'm just shocked. And I just said the first thing that came into my head, I said, you're no little girl with golden curls. And then it smiled a most evil smile, and suddenly it was a little girl with golden curls. Well, I ran out of the trailer. And the herbalist said, did you find it? I said, yes. He said, can you get it out? And I said, she was so hopeful. They had no place else to live. And I said, sure, I'll go try. And I go back in there and I try everything I can think of. And then it won't appear to me, but I feel it in the room. And I'm sitting on her bed in the entry room, and I'm calling out to it. And finally I lure it into with the flashlight. I'm doing this thing like you do with a cat, like the laser light. I'm saying, I can see myself in the mirror, and I prop up my mirror. And one of the things that Helen said was, bring a mirror. And I said, what's the mirror going to do? She said, don't you know anything about mirror magic? And I said, a little, but not hardly anything. She said, oh, well, then don't bring the mirror. Well, I brought the mirror anyway. And it occurred to me that after I'd used everything else I could think of, the mirror. So I set up the mirror after I've thrown water at it. I think really got it upset. Then I set up the mirror, and I'm playing this cat and mouse game with the light. And then I run the light right up to the mirror, and I said, I can see myself in the mirror. Don't you wish you could see yourself in the mirror? If you could, you would be whole. Wouldn't that be good? And I said, I can help you. And finally, it seemed like it really had gone to the mirror. And I grabbed the mirror, took it out on the porch, stomped on it into little pieces, and I said, bury this thing. I said, this is it. It's out. And I salted the trailer, staked it out, called the 4 directions, and I said, that's it. And then I got in my car and I tried to drive home. Only halfway home, something started choking me. So,
okay, I have to tell you, you need to wrap really fast.
Well, it didn't end well because I went back and I said it's out of the trailer, but it's very angry. And I said, I don't know what's going to happen. She said, well, check back with me in a few days. And I said, yes, then we'll know if it's back in the trailer or if it's out for good. Because I thought it would just wander the woods aimlessly and not bother them after it was out of the trailer. But unfortunately, the trailer burned down in a couple of days. The dog had been tied under the trailer with a chain. They had never staked out their dog, never tethered it. They had no idea how the dog was put on a chain, but it burned to a crisp. Trailer was demolished. The family was homeless. It didn't end well. And I think that everyone who had lived in that trailer had had similar experiences. I mean, we found later on there were things left in a lean-to in the back, preserves that were carefully marked and put in order, and somebody had hastily left them all behind. There were names of dogs and dates carved into the tree that went way, way back. It was just an unhappy place. So that was probably the creepiest haunting I'd ever seen.
And it does sound really creepy. And I don't know that I'd want to go there. And the mistake, and I shouldn't even be talking because we need to wrap up, is that you turn the lights off.
Turn the lights on.
You should have left the lights on. See, I don't go into any place by myself with the lights off. Ever, ever. It's a rule because you can see the ghosts with the lights on or off, in my opinion.
Right.
Anyway, Vaughn, wonderful show. Thank you for coming on and spooking all of us and sharing so much wisdom about ghosts and hauntings.
It was fun. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for coming on, and you have a happy Halloween.
You too. Happy Halloween.
That's Vaughn Braschler. His book is Confessions of a Reluctant Ghost Hunter. You can find him on Facebook, Vaughn Braschler on Facebook. And next week, we have Philip Camellia coming on speaking about the collapse of materialism. And in the second hour, Gabriel Roberts, the root of spiritual belief. And until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio.